Good morning, Mexico. Good afternoon, Europe. Good afternoon as well, South America. We are very happy to be able to start this wonderful webinar that we have prepared for today. This is part of our cycle with the Mexican Association of Conference Interpreters as part of the International Federation of Translators and Interpreters, FIT North America. So we have managed to get for you the best of the best for this. We know that translators work a lot and they do a lot of documents, and now as interpreters we are doing the same. Tania, I want to thank Tania Saldivar and Lorena Rincon. They have done a great job coordinating all this. This is Tania Saldivar, that's Lorena over there. Thank you so much. The cyber girls from the CEMIC. They have done everything we can see possible. So if you allow me, Tania, if you can please introduce Eliza Kalderon, our speaker for today. Wonderful speaker for today, and I had the pleasure of knowing her and meeting her and heard her, and she was pleased to accept this invitation. So if you can please tell us who Eliza Kalderon is. Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to have you all here. Also, Eliza, to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting to come and give us this very valuable information. Eliza Calderon was born in 1983 in Varna, Bulgaria, and Russian and English were her first contact with a foreign language. And 2 years after primary school, she started out with German as well. She studied in the University Johannes Gutenberg from Maguncia and the School of Translation, Linguistics, and Science of the Culture in Hamburg, Germany. And in 2007, she graduated from translation with a degree in translation with a combination of German, Spanish, and Russian. In 2010, she got a scholarship from SCID, the General Direction of the Translation from the European Union, to have a master's degree in Bulgaria. And then in 2011, she went back to Germany to make her PhD. And as a result of this PhD, her doctoral research was precisely regarding the neurophysiological processes of simultaneous interpreting, with which she got in 2016 her PhD degree. And so she'll be sharing with us very kindly all that experience that she had, the results that she obtained, and all the information that came from this research study. Thank you, Tania. And before giving Eliza the floor, I would like to give the floor to Lorena Rincon, so that you can tell us who our wonderful interpreters for today are, and they're all working pro bono. So if you can tell us their names, we have to acknowledge that. And thank you, Helen Lopez, our super assistant, always helping us with everything. Okay, very well. We're in the Spanish-English booth. We want to thank, we have Ana Cortez, Lorena de la Vega, and at the end, I'll be also contributing with them. Thank you so much, girls. In the French booth, I don't know all the names, so just give me just 1 second. In the French booth, we have Roberto Sanchez, and we also have in this French booth, I'm sorry, I wasn't ready for this. Can we thank them at the end? So here, I don't want to make any mistakes on the names, and so we don't take more time also. And we also want to thank our friends, the sign language interpreters, who are helping us today. And this is also to open up the information to more people. So let me just remind you that we have a small world icon on the bottom part, so you can choose the language of your preference. There we have Portuguese, French, English, and Spanish sign language, Mexican sign language. And so that you don't feel that you have been distracted by the sign language. If you don't need it, you don't have to activate it, but you can also activate it through the world icon there. So without any further ado, if you can I'm going to leave you to our speaker, and Eliza, the floor is all yours. So Eliza, please share with us your wisdom. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very, very nervous. I'm so sorry. But when I heard the number of participants that we have, 190 from around the world, well, I'm super excited and also a bit nervous. I want to ask the interpreter. I want to apologize with the interpreters if I start speaking too fast. Just let me know on the chat or just make a sign there. I'm going to try and go slower. We have 230 participants, 230 people listening to you. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. That's not something that helps me too much, but let's see how I do it. Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation, Sergio. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to speak today regarding the topic of my doctoral thesis. I love doing it. I love the topic, and just present it. At the end, if you want, you can ask questions. I will be pleased to answer anything I can. Sergio, can you go ahead with the presentation? Yes, let's open up the PowerPoint, please. Tanya, if you can help us with that. Sure, Helen will be in charge of that. Just 1 second, and again, thank you so very much. Can you all see it well? Okay, Ellie. So thank you. Well, the title, as you can see, this is the title of my doctoral thesis, Neurophysiology of the Simultaneous Interpreting. I'm going to present how the process, how I did it, and what were the points of interest in this work. Let's move on to the next slide, please. The first one. Research interest, please. I'm sorry, it went, oh, just 1 second, please. There. Thank you. So I'm going to start. What was the research interest and where did it come from? Then I'm going to present to you the objectives and the hypothesis. I will also be telling you what the design and the conditions of this study were. Who were the participants, the corpus, the technical characteristics of the study, which were our evaluation methods, and of course, what's most important, the results. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Everyone, please, all the participants, if you can help us keeping your microphones off. Thank you. So this interest arise from when I was working in my degree, interpretation and translation, actually at a class in which, because I was studying from German into Spanish, Spanish into German, a teacher once told me, well, interpreting the foreign language, it's almost impossible. This is something that our brains cannot do. And I think it was like 22, 23 years of age. And I was like, we'll see about that because I'm not sure if that's true or not. So let's see what happens in our brain. and if this can be observable or not. And this is where my interest arises. And so I started out with a draft thesis for the end of my degree, and then I broadened it for my doctoral thesis. And so this is from where it came from. Can we please move on to the next slide? So very briefly regarding the data, because most people always ask how long did it take you and how did you do it? Well, it took me a bit more than what's usual in Germany. Usually it takes 2, 3, 4 years. And it took me like 5 years. And the study itself was 3 years long from 2012 through 2015. And the thesis defense was at the end at the end of 2016. Next one, please. Thank you. And so for starters, we had to do questions. What is it that we wanted to research on? And these were the 5 questions that we asked ourselves. The first one was the most important one. Is it really possible to observe the human brain while it is interpreting? I'm going to explain later on what did I mean with this. The next question was then, what techniques should we use to observe the brain? And back then, the newest one, or the one that was most developed, was the functional nuclear MRI. So the question was, can we apply this technique also to observe the brain of an interpreter while he or she are interpreting? The next question, which is already based on what my teacher told me back then, is there a difference? So, okay, the brain is activated while we are interpreting, but is there a difference between interpretation and also the shadowing process? Because I don't know if this has happened to you too, but some customers and clients or other people who don't have much to do with interpretation, they think that interpretation is just repeating words or phrases from one language into the other one, but that it doesn't have much, that it is the same to repeat and to interpret. And that's why we're like, okay, let's just research the differences in the brain activation, in the interpretation process, and in the shadowing process. And of course, the next question was, so then, can we observe this? Can we see what are the areas of the brain that are implied on this process? The next question was, is there are any difference on the brain activation between interpretation from A language to B language or the other way around, so from B to A? Thank you. We can move on to the next slide, please. So on the next step, we had to decide what the language A and language B would be so that we can do the study. And given that we were in Germany, what was easier for us was to choose language A, German, and I chose Spanish as language 2 so that we can look for the speeches, and also because I wanted to do a test first of this technique to make sure it was working and to interpret in the scanner. And given that Spanish is my working tongue, I decided then to choose this combination. At the end, this turned out to be quite difficult so that we can recruit subjects that would have this combination, because turns out that in Germany, there was, or still there is, a lot of people who are bilingual. And what we wanted to research was what are the neurophysiological processes in people who are monolingual, people who have learned the B language in an age after 12, 15 years of age. And there are different definitions on who a bilingual person is. So we decided to apply this when you have had to learn the language after 15, 16 years of age. So it was a group of 12 people. that I'm going to introduce later on. Then the next question would be how to do it. Are we going to record the speech, or are we going to look for original speeches? And because I wanted to study the processes, the neurophysiological processes in a situation that could be as real as possible, we decided to choose original speeches, which had his pros and cons at the end, and I'll be telling you more about this on the next slide. So that is why we thought of what was important for a neurophysiological study was that we had two speakers that could be the most similar. Words per minute as the University of Vienna suggests. Next one, please.
Bueno, como dije que buscábamos a personas de lengua materna.
So as I said, we're looking for people who had a mother tongue German and first B language Spanish. So we needed also a minimal number
para obtener
in order to have consistent results. So the biologist who was working with me on the thesis, he said that in biology, the number it was important that they were conference interpreters or that they had we were conference interpreters with a degree or with a master's degree, and we would suppose that there was going to be a difference in the brain activity between students and professionals. So we decided that we wanted to make the study only with professional interpreters. And as I said, German and Spanish, each of them answer a quick survey in which they would tell us what their experience was in number of days on conferences that they have interpreted, as suggested by Ike. They also had to answer the question to whether they were left-handed or right-handed. I'm going to explain this also later on, because it was important to know this. We had 3 people who were left-handed. They made a localization test from the linguistic center in the brain. Next one, please. And well, here you can see the different characteristics of the participants or subjects. See that most of them were women and only 2 of them were men. However, back then in 2012, when we performed this study, we didn't know that there was any difference between the brain activity of men and women. Women were interpreters, so we assume that it was the same, and hence this is why we had both sexes, both genders among our participants. You can see also age, and this is the age in which they had learned the Spanish. So they are all German, and you know that the minimal age was 15 years. So not to consider them bilingual. So not to have 2 mother tongues. So you can see the age that they each had at the moment of the research and the experience that they had in conference days. There was a very big difference there. However, our hypothesis was that after graduating from interpretation, you would have enough experience. And so to gather this information was just for statistics. We also asked them if they had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. Then up to 2007, if I'm not mistaken, was different in Germany. That is why it was important to know this, because the bachelor's degree is the bachelor's degree was 5 years long and master's degree 2 years long. And you can see that they all had SV language, Spanish, and we also asked them their C language just for statistics. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So now let's move on to the most interesting part. What was the corpus? The corpus had two parts, one of which was the interpretation and the shadowing from German into Spanish, and the second part from Spanish into German. In total, we researched 5 conditions, alternating them. For example, 2-3 minutes, interpreters would have to interpret simultaneously out loud, and this would be recorded. The next part, they would have to interpret simultaneously, however, just mentally, just in their heads without speaking. The other condition was shadowing, speaking out loud, and then mental shadowing, and then just listening. I'm going to explain later on what the objective of choosing all these 5 conditions were, but you can also make some questions if you want. Let's move on to the next one, please. Technical characteristic.
As you can see in both parts, from German to Spanish and Spanish to German, it lasted for about 43 minutes. The 5 conditions that we just discussed were repeated 4 times. The objective was to avoid getting, the wear and tear, and to get used to it, and also to provide false data. With the conditions, the interpreters would look at the screen, a small signal that we will see in the next slide. Next slide, please. You can see on the left, this was the symbol that they saw on the screen. We thought about doing this with a sign, with a audible sign, but we decided that that could distract them. And the next idea is to write the word, like in this case, listen, interpret, out loud, shadowing, and so on. But this also is related to the language itself. And we had to understand that this was more mental effort for the interpreters. So with this, we thought about using the signs or symbols. Each one of the interpreters had received them before the test, a week before the test, and they could get used to each sign. And that meant less mental effort at the time of changing from one task to the next. Next slide, please. That's what the interpreters saw on the screen. On the top left, it was Mariano Rajoy with the sign. This meant listen. With this sign or symbol, the only thing they could do is to listen. As always happens at the conferences, when we switch and we are not on the microphone, it's not our time to interpret. At the bottom image is Ginghao with the microphone and the headset. Then the interpreters knew that we have to start interpreting out loud. I have some technical information that I'm going to go over pretty quick because I don't think they are so interesting. Just so you know what type of technique we're using. It was a Siemens scanner, 3 Tesla, not invasive method. Before we started with the study, we had to send a request of ethical review to the clinic. Then we also used hearing protection, so we couldn't hear the knocking of the scanner, the noise. I don't know if you ever had this type of those, of scanners that have like a tapping noise, and it's bothersome. And they were in there for about an hour, so that's why it was important to get hearing protection. And we used earphones without sound, but with a microphone. You will see in the next one, it was a coil that was some type of antenna around the head that was measuring the brain activation, and the interpreters that were there since before the study started, they needed to have good audio, but good visual. So the conditions that were real, pretty much like what we have during a conference, or as close as possible as during a conference. Next slide, please. Here you can see the first colleague that participated. I really thank her because she also participated in my Tessina study. What you see around the head is the antenna, the microphone that we use to record the interpreting and the shadowing, the headset. And in this mirror is where she would view, because the screen with the presentation was outside the room, outside the scanner because of the magnetic field, but in this mirror they could see the speaker. Okay, next. This is from the outside. You can see the scanner. We have our colleague there. Behind it, there was another room. It was separated by a window. And you could see through the window, they could see with the mirror, they could see the speaker, the control console. We also had communication. Each one of the interpreters could interrupt at any time, and they could communicate if they wanted to. This is what the interpreters could see. The speaker, the screen is outside the room, of course, but they could see the speaker in the mirror. Some technical data with respect to the evaluation of the results. We use software SPM8 that layer by layer converts data in a 3D space. I'm not going to go in details because these are technical details. It's just for you to know what steps we had for the assessment. I think that the most interesting thing would be the last part, recording and transcription of the output out loud. It was necessary to defend the thesis to know that the interpreters had interpreted or shadowed, and to compare at what time they started with décalage and when they started to interpret, or when they started with shadowing. And thanks to the recording, we were able to measure exactly what were the tasks involved in each one of the in each one of the activities or tasks. This was also part of the assessment. I didn't do this part because I don't have that knowledge, but I work with a biologist that helped us with the evaluation of the results. The most important thing here is the model specification, is where we test the model. Before we start, we develop a model when we don't know if it's necessary to see if this has worked. This is what I'm saying with the recording and, out loud of the performance. Next one, please. As I said at the beginning, 3 left-handed persons participated. The language is on the left hemisphere in 96% of right-handed and about 70% of left-handed people. Almost 4% of right-handed, where the language is located. I'm sorry, I mean the lefties, where the language is located in the right hemisphere. And that is why it's important to test to obtain the necessary results. Here you can see the results of the 3 left-handed subjects, where we saw that they had the language on the left hemisphere. The next slide, you can see the test that was performed. This is what the participants could see on the screen. This test was developed by Dr. Crick, the biologist that worked with me in this thesis. Participants would see one after the next. I have both images here, but they would see one image or the other. For example, in this case, the fruit, that is the object, or in the next case, just an image. And in this case, they had to say blah, blah. That meant that it was no animal, no fruit, nothing they could describe. And they have to say it in their A language, which was German. In this image, the comparison between mental simultaneous interpreting and mental shadowing compare with listening. You can see that the result in this comparison of Wernicke and Broca, it underscores the difference in neural activation that is caused by simultaneous interpreting compared to just shadowing. To the right, you can see shadowing. To the left, simultaneous interpreting. It might surprise us because it looks like in shadowing, we have more areas participating and less activation in the yellow parts, which mean more activation, and the red parts, not so much. So to the left, you can see that in simultaneous interpreting, we have less brain areas, but they're more activated. There's more activation when there's interpreting. You can see a visible activation of the areas that are related to language. For example, here in the lower left parietal lobe during shadowing, but the same one is not present during simultaneous interpreting, which means, or well, we'll see that in the next slides, that it was the opposite of what we expected. Of course, interpreting has to do with the language, but it's not what takes more energy. And we will see that in some of the next slides. Next slide, please. Here you can see both conditions, simultaneous interpreting and shadowing in a global image. So you can see the contrast. The areas that are marked in yellow, there was neural activity in shadowing. You can see more areas that participate in shadowing. In the areas in red, we can see neural activity during simultaneous interpreting. In the orange parts, we can see when the activation, the neural activation, it overlaps. So conclusion is even when simultaneous interpreting activated areas that are relevant to the language compared to control, which is to listen, the same activity did not show additional activation compared with shadowing. But for contrast, we can see both linguistic activities in yellow, shadowing both in Spanish as in German when we put them together, and interpreting from German to Spanish and from Spanish to German. Thank you. Here in this image, we are comparing both linguistic directions, which was one of the hypotheses of our work, German to Spanish and Spanish German. If we can stay here. The areas that were activated the most during simultaneous interpreting from German to Spanish, they're marked in red. In blue, we can see the linguistic activation from Spanish to German during the activation to Spanish. We have motor areas, and that's the most interesting thing. In the opposite direction, Spanish to German, the right lower lobe was more active. So both linguistic directions recruit different focus when you perform a mental activity that seems to be similar. What we see here is that while we interpret in our mother language to the foreign language or B language, what it takes less effort from our brain is phonetics, articulation in the foreign language. That's what's seen also in the shadowing, but it is also in the task of listening. And we were surprised by this because we expected to see more neural activation in the areas of grammar, or see how the interpreters were looking for the right word. And it turns out that what stresses our brain the most when we interpret is pronunciation, the right articulation in the foreign language. That's what really surprised us the most and what was part of our hypothesis. this has been what I've done. If we can go to the next slide. I would like to show the name and thank everybody that helped me during the project. First, Professor Dr. Andrews, who was my professor and really helped me. She was really excited about this topic. Professor Wright and Dr. Crick from Sarah Clinic that gave us available all the technique, the scanner, and also Dr. Crick would go with me every weekend during the tests. And he also helped me with the evaluation of the results. Next one, please. And because of personal protection of personal data, I cannot thank the interpreters by name, those who participated, but without them, it wouldn't have been possible. But I thank them. Also, the friends of the School of Translation at Germenstein that provided the funds for transportation or travel expenses of the participants because they came from different parts of Germany. At the end, the next one, please.
A very short list. Here I have picked some of the books that helped me the most. Many of these books are also in English or translated into English. And here you can see the blog by Anna Rutten. She participated in the thesis and in the study of the thesis, and I am very grateful to her as well. And if we can go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? And some more bibliography. And thank you very much for your time, for having invited me and listened to me. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Incredible presentation, Ellie. Thank you so much. You were wonderful. See how there were no nerves involved. No, there were lots of nerves involved. So thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. We have a lot of questions that have been entering throughout your presentation. Tanya, do you have them prepared so that we can present them, please? And we also have the possibility of having them in the chat, and Tanya and Lorena can go through them. So if anyone wants to make any comments, please raise your hand and we will allow you to make your comments live with your camera on. Hello, Ida. Yes, I turned my camera on purpose. So I followed the presentation with a lot of interest. Thank you very much, Eddie, for it, for your time and for this study that is so necessary. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting was seeing this difference There seems to be an audio issue. Ellie is frozen. Am I there? Yes, we can hear you, but I think that Eliza was having some connection issues in Germany. Hopefully she will be back soon. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We had so many people present for this presentation. Hi, Elisa, can you hear me now? Yes, I think I got cut off, no problem. So I said that I thought that this was very interesting, the activation of different parts of the brain with the shadowing and with interpreting, especially because lately what we have been learning in teaching is that shadowing is not helpful for interpreting because it doesn't involve the processing of information, but just listening. So do you think that there is something that we can do that can confirm that since shadowing is not an exercise in processing information, it's something that you're not actually doing? No, because we weren't searching in that direction, but I think that it is something. Shadow can be used as an exercise for interpreting because of articulating. I have only studied in Germany and Bulgaria and in Venezuela a little bit. I haven't been in all of the universities, but where we have been, we did not do classes in phonetics. It was up to us to learn it however we wanted to. So nobody practiced with us. And what we saw from the results is that what causes more effort in our brain is articulation. So if I'm not practicing something, that's going to be something that's going to be more of an effort for me. And I'm going to have fewer resources for it, for example, in something that's very technical. So I've also taught, and my conclusion has been shadowing does help a lot. Of course, we can't confuse that with interpreting, and we can't do it all the time. But if I'm going to interpret tomorrow or in 2 weeks, I'm going to be working with someone who is Colombian or with a group of Colombians, what I'm going to do is practice shadowing in Colombian Spanish just to get used to it myself and to have more resources in the future for the content, for their presentations. Did that answer your question? Yes, I was interested because the way that you presented it, I would have thought, what happens if you are using the combination of German to Spanish, if you are using different languages that are very different, like Chinese and French or Chinese and Turkish? Would something different happen because it's not the same as interpreting to shadow? Does shadowing work for articulation, for fluidity? Yes, but not for the process of interpreting. I would love to make a comment on shadowing in Georgetown. We used to use it a lot as an exercise to refine our B language, the pronunciation in our B language. It was used extensively, not necessarily to repeat it as such, but in order to refine the way that you spoke. Thank you very much, Ila, for your question. Tanya, we have more questions that were made in the chat. Yes, one of the questions that we were asked was that it's very interesting, thank you very much, but if it was considered at any moment as a limitation of the study, the fact that the interpreter was laying down instead of sitting down, if this might be disruptive for normal working. Yes, we considered this. And that's why we had different filters, and we filtered this as well. because in studies that have looked at the hormonal activation while we're walking, while we're talking, and what we used filters for as well as for maxillofacial movement, because our brain is always active. So yes, we used filters in this way. We were always, was it considered that the brain might have a predisposition that is different for the regular interpreting situation because interpreters knew that they were the subject of a study or of research? No. That's why we did the recordings, so that we could be sure that they were really recording. It wasn't to control the quality of the interpreting, but it was in order to compare, to see if Mariana Rajoy said good morning, if the interpreter was on the next phrase, etc. Yes, exactly. That leads us to the next question of whether if there was a measurement of the quality of the interpreting to see what the different mental activities were, like with shadowing, and if that had been measured, the precision or not. We did it on purpose this way. That is what I promised my colleagues, so that they would not feel like they were being tested, but rather like if that they were in an interpreting booth. So in the majority of cases that we saw that was not a measure of the quality necessarily. That was my commitment with my colleagues. And if we can share the thesis, the information that we have, many people want to see it in writing, because of course it's a lot of information and we didn't have that much time to really go into a lot of depth with all of this. I would love to make a suggestion that you visit her website, where her studies are and her research is in German, but there's a lot of material there. And from Corpus Christi, someone asks us if it has been planned to do a study of this kind, not with simultaneous, but with consecutive interpreting. No, that's impossible with MRIs, because we can't enter the scanner with something that we need to write. At least at the moment, we don't have that ability. I would have loved to have done that, to compare that with the same speech, with the same speakers, with native Spanish speakers, or with B language that is German, and then compare the two things to see if the same areas are activated. That would be interesting. I can't imagine what it would be like, because there's so much body movement already, and that would affect the results. Here we had asked them not to move, and that was also part of the results, because normally when we're in the booth, we're moving our hands, we're moving our head. And in this case, also, they had their headphones and the antenna so that they could not move. So I think that with consecutive, it would not be possible. If anyone else would like to make a question live, please raise your hand. Another question that we had during the presentation was if we saw that the hormonal load was similar in simultaneous and shadowing, or if it was more activated in simultaneous. Repeat the question, please. Within the findings of hormonal activation, comparing simultaneous and shadowing. And simultaneous, is there more hormonal activation? And is it more concentrated in certain areas for shadowing? No, but what we saw, I think in the second image that I shared, was the number of areas, because that's what surprises, because we thought that during interpreting, there was going to be an activation of the whole brain, and we saw no. Very few areas were activated, but with a very high intensity. But in shadowing, practically the entire brain was activated with very little intensity. What does this say? It tells us that interpreters are used to interpreting and not shadowing. So it's harder for them to do shadowing. So many questions. And from Bogota, someone asks us, what suggestions can you make from this research to improve the study and teaching of simultaneous interpreting, to do more shadowing? I think that to practice phonetics and pronunciation in your B language, to practice it actively. You have a beautiful B language, by the way. All right, let's go to the people that have their hands raised. Georgianne, would you like to make your question? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Ellie for such a professional research, so enriching. I am a conference interpreter. I'm a linguist, and I'm interested in mentioning coordinate bilingualism and compound bilingualism. I know that it is not the center of your study, Ellie, but you're talking about age. And I think that maybe you're talking about acquisition and learning. A little bit of context: when I was the director of the Bachelor's of Interpreting, I used to do the interviews and the admission exams, and many candidates had they were bilingual from childhood, and you would think those are the people that are going to have it easy. Those are the ones that are going to have an easy path. And poor me, that I learned instead of acquiring my second language. So I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. You know, those people are never going to be able to do this. And the results were that these two theories of compound bilingualism, they're normally when somebody acquires two mother tongues or the two languages before 6 years of age. And coordinate bilingualism has to do with an acquisition of the mother tongue and the learning of the second language. So poor people like this, they're in trouble if they're like me. No, after 3 or 4 years doing this, I saw that in many cases, the coordinate bilingual people had better results than compound bilinguals. What was the problem here? It's like with your spine. Compound bilinguals only had one. It was fused. Their two languages were fused. So when they interpreted, they couldn't separate the two. But coordinate bilinguals, since they acquired or learned them at different times, they had a greater ease to interpret. So I would love to hear your opinion on this. Yes, this is a very broad subject. So I'll try to respond as briefly as possible. There are many theories about bilingualism and what a bilingual person is. For this study, I had to make a decision, which one of these decisions do we use as the basis for the study, and the one that convinced me the most, and it has nothing to do, it's not scientific. I read all of the theories on bilingualism and I said, this is the one that makes the most logical sense to me. And that's how I decided to go with it. Bilingual. That can be someone who has gone to a German school in Mexico. In their day-to-day, they use the same vocabulary. And based on this, I said, for people who are not bilingual are people who were grew up in Germany, who learned Spanish just as a foreign language. And that's how we used it for this study. So it would be interesting to do the same research with the same speech with people who are bilingual. For example, from the German school in Mexico, there's so many things that can be done with this. Thank you, Georgian. Okay, now Magdalena. The doctor is not here, but we were both watching the presentation and we are both interpreters. Hello from Quito. I am a doctor and then I became an interpreter, and I had a question about MRIs. I understand what it's capable of detecting when there is a difference, greater difference in neurons that is much more activated than the rest. So I think, I don't know if you agree with this, shadowing is much less exhausting than interpreting. So it wouldn't make the sense with the results that were shown about the whole brain being activated. I don't know if it would make sense to measure other parameters of the brain, such as the heart rate and things like that, because it's important to see what consumes more energy and improve our work that way. I don't know if this is something that sounded too complex. Yes, we thought about many things. We thought about stress. It was just a thesis, a doctoral thesis. So those were the limitations. I wasn't working in the clinic and I had to reduce to as least as possible. I would have loved to research more things, but at the end, also because of financial reasons, we had to decide what is important for this doctoral thesis so that we could offer a basis for future research. I think that this was a third design that we carried out, and we would get rid of previous ones that we saw that weren't working, and interpreting out loud, interpreting mentally. This was the result of previous work that took many years, because at the beginning we just wanted to record everything. But we said, okay, if they're moving their mouth the whole time, we're not going to see anything in the brain. The brain is going to be activated all the time. So we have to figure out how we do this. So we also added the level of the listening, because the brain is processing language, but the person is not moving their mouth. They don't have to do anything actively. So unfortunately, we had to discard many things that we would have liked to investigate, many tasks. Maybe there is other research that was done in Vienna, and so that's why we decided to go with the MRIs. Yes, it's Ingrid Kurz is the one who carried out this research. In, if you email me, I can send you all of the information. Estela Moran. Hello. I wanted to make a quick question. I wanted to ask a quick question. In interpreting to our B language, does this activity mean that there is more tiredness? Or why does the brain not get as tired? It might be the conclusion that we reached was, how do we explain it? So, you know that if we learn a language when we're older, we always have an accent. And for us, that was the explanation that interpreters are aware that we have to pronounce things properly. And we know that in our B language, we don't pronounce things as well as in our A language. So that was the explanation that we gave. That's where the greatest effort comes into play. Your question is very interesting because very often in my school, we used to say that working from A to B was easier because in your A, you understood everything and you could figure out how to say it in a different way. And for the accent in Latin American Spanish, many interpreters have a better accent in their B language than in their acquired language because Latin American Spanish has a lot of variations. Like the S that sometimes isn't pronounced, etc. So maybe this is something that we could do in the future to see the EKG, for example, as well. Yes, one comment. I think that we need to see, what does easier mean? Does easier mean that we can understand something better, but when it comes to producing something in another language, that makes it harder? Ernesto, it's so nice to see you here with us. He's the current president of the Mexican School of Interpreters.
So now I'm just checking the session with Dr. Sameron. She did an excellent job. I'm surprised of how professional her research is, and hopefully she'll be able to continue on doing more research. I have a question here, and I'm sorry, you have a very low volume and it's also cutting off. If you can just maybe come closer to the microphone. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I have a question with regards to the results. I think they are antithetical, completely different from what common sense would say, even from what you expected. I mean, from what everybody would expect with regards to the idea that we have on how is it that our brain works, because it is working. In fact, it is listening, it is speaking, it is processing two languages. So theoretically in two separate parts of the brain. However, by looking at the brain activity, there is a very light, very bright light there, but clearly not what we would expect to see compared to, for example, shadowing, right? This is very surprising. And with the study that you've already mentioned, I believe that the studies that done in Vienna, they had shown that there was more brain activity in this, like rather than in other professions when performing their activity. But what do you think what do you attribute this to, or is there no way to explain this change in activity on the EEG? Come again, between the electrocardiogram and the MRI. I don't know. These are just two different methods that That's all. And because they had already made a study with the EG, I said like, okay, let's try a different method to see if we have different results. That was the reason for on the one side. And on the other hand, on the other side, Dr. Creed had already worked with me on my thesis, and he works with MRI. So this was the easiest thing to do, and the clinic is close to the city that I live, so I needed to see how to figure this out. That's the only reason. And I think that the study that we mentioned from Ingrid Kurt, they just made mental interpretation. I don't think they did something out loud. So they had to trust on interpreters interpreting, but there was no kind of control at all. So the results could be compared, but we have to know that there was no control at all there. Thank you, Ernesto. We have 13 minutes out of the hour and a half that Eliza is giving us. By the way, we have here on the chat the link for Ingrid Kurtz so that we can take a look at this. It is in English so that you can check this out. Yeah. Tania, do you have any further? Yes. Now take learning that we were, because we have so many sign language interpreters, they are asking, well, among so many things, the reach of the study should be it's very specific, but we all we're very curious about everything, and we have different ideas, right? We should have done this, we could do that. But here, for example, they tell us, they are asking if you considered for the shadowing process, if the semantic and the phonetic, what was the part that had the most importance? And also with regards to simultaneous interpreting, if you consider this at all. Yes, that's the most amazing part, that in each of the conditions, I mean, interpretation out loud, mental interpreting, shadowing out loud, and also mental shadowing, and also just listening. In all 5 conditions, the neuronal area that was the most active was always the one that corresponds to phonetics. And from there, that's where we draw that conclusion from, that is what is the biggest effort. Because, I mean, just by listening in Spanish, let's say, it would activate also more the area of phonetics. Very interesting. And just to finish, we have other questions, but I don't think we'll have enough time, unfortunately. But I think this one is good as a summary. Just to summarize the findings that you got. They're asking, what are the areas of the brain that are involved, according to what you've seen, the areas that are involved in interpretation? Because there are other studies that show that the prefrontal cortex, or a combination of areas, but for you more specifically, what areas did you see that were the ones that presented the most activity? They are asking specifically for interpretation, but maybe it'll be interesting to close with both. Let me just take a look on the image. Just give me 1 second. Do you have it there, Tania? Is this the one, or is it another one further down? Is this the one, Ellie? Your mic is off, Ellie. Sorry. I think I'm a bit tired already. Sorry about that. We totally understand. Don't worry. Well, as you can see here, this yellow part is the frontal lobe. And what's interesting here, it's not the yellow part, but rather what we see on the left, this is the articulation part. And when we found this, with this finding, this is what was very surprising. And we wouldn't then compare shadowing and interpretation, but rather we were like, what happens then? So why articulation? Where is this coming from? So we were focusing more on this result from this. But I think it was the angular turn, if I'm not mistaken. The angular turn that is the one that is the most active when interpreting. Yes. Ellie, as I understood, the greatest stress is when trying to understand a bad accent in the language that you were interpreting from. That too, but also processing on the B language. Yes. And we saw that because we had Mariano Rajoy. I'm not sure if you have heard Mariano Rajoy, you may know what I mean. Yes, precisely. Yes, thank you, Tony, for the smile. We loved it. Does anybody else has any questions? Because we are just about to run out of time. The time that Eli, my dear Eli Calderon, gave us. So if you have any other questions, let's just do it now. Luz Amelia over there. No, I just wanted to congratulate her. I'm clapping. I wanted to congratulate her. It's just clapping. Lorena. So we now have the greetings, the appreciation for the interpreters. They did a splendid job and I want to acknowledge them. I want for those who can, if you can please turn your cameras on. Lorena was one of them, and who are the rest of them? Hi, Esther. Well, in the Spanish-English booth, we had Lorena Rincon, Lorena de la Vega, and Ana Cortés. In Mexican Sign Language, we had Luz Magali Guzmán Valle, Ángel de Jesús de la Parra, and Emi Martínez Ortega. In the French booth, we had Guillermo Casillas and Roberto Sánchez, and in Portuguese, Marcelo de Souza and Gabriela Clefi. Thank you so very much to all of you and our super assistant, Helen. Thank you so much, Helen. You are always supporting us and helping us out in all the events online and in everything that you cannot see that is backstage from the association. And if you allow me, I want to thank you also. I want to thank the interpreters as well. I would take a look at the chat just to make sure I wasn't speaking too fast. I hope I didn't. And if I did, I'm so very sorry. No, you were great, but I'm sorry, but I was so nervous that, no, don't worry. Otherwise I would have told you. Okay, slow. Ellie, I have nothing else but to thank you. Truly thank you for your availability. I know this is a very hard topic and as good interpreters, we always love analyzing in depth and nothing ever is perfect. We always want more. So I believe it has been an extraordinary presentation. That is why since the first time I heard it with you, I invited you and I was like, we have to do this. And we have a lot of work to do from now on. And we can even plan an EEG whenever we are interpreting. That's something we can do. So we have a lot of things to plan. We have to do a lot of research studies there. And I think we still have a lot more to do. Translators are always studying and analyzing. We have to work with our full body when we're live. And I think it would be worth doing a study and see how is that we can use also remote simultaneous interpreting. So what happens when you are interpreting through platforms that are completely different? Yes, well, this was kind of like remote interpreting because we had screens. So, and because we had so many people from different parts of the world, I would like to offer you, if you want to do a similar study or you need the design, you can get in touch with me because it will be very interesting, as one of the colleagues was saying, it will be interesting to compare Spanish and Chinese or other languages to see if we get the same results. So if anybody is interested, I would be willing to give you all the design and explain to you how is it that we do it, why did we do it, and if anybody wants to take this opportunity, I'm open to that. And I just want to tell you that I had to interpret lay down on my bag, and I think I'm not the only one. So just, you know, Gabriela Grefi, thank you so much. I don't see Marcel. Where do we have our other Portuguese interpreter, Marcel from Brasilia? He has done the interpretation for us, Lorena de la Vega, in English. Thank you so much, Lorena. Thank you so much to the sign language interpreters. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. We also have Guillaume. Guillaume, you were great. Truly. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roberto. I love your interpretation. And there's nothing further but just to ask you to please turn on your camera so we can take the final photo, and let's clap for Ellie. Let's give her a big round of applause in sign language. So everyone, please turn your cameras on so we can see each other. Great. Ready? Just one more, okay? Thank you, Magdalena. You didn't turn your camera on. And Parecia Saipar. Okay. Extraordinary. And please, we'll soon have this on our YouTube channel, and we'll have it in all 4 languages, which is an effort from the Conference Interpreter Associations, the CEMIG and the FIT. And I want to send a greeting to the other organizations, the OMT and METLI and the Intercontinental University. Thank you so very much to all of them as well for their participation and their help. And our president, Ernesto Zavala, and Vice President Almalazo, thank you so very much for continuing this effort. I want to ask you, here we have emails. And whenever you have time, just let us know what topic would you like to hear about. The next topic will be very interesting. It will be given by the president of FIT North America. It will be regarding artificial intelligence, friend or enemy of the interpreters. This is the next one, the one upcoming. I don't have the date here handy, but it will be in June. We'll let you know with time. Please let us know what is it that you need. I want to take the opportunity now that I have Marcel here. We had a presentation that he gave us from Nuremberg to Wuhan. It was an extraordinary presentation, and we also had a great audience. Eli, it was over 300 participants from around the world were with you today. Record. I'm still very nervous, super nervous. No, don't be. And I want to congratulate you for your wonderful Spanish, and I've already told you this. So without anything else, Lorena, Tania, can we please close? No. Thank you so much for the invitation. It has been a great pleasure to me. Thank you. If you can send me the links for the next session, I would like to participate. Yes, of course. And we're going to send you the link for the recording so that you have it as well. And I want to thank all of our colleagues from FIT Latam, the ones joining us. You know that FIT North America through CEMIG you will always be invited to join us. Thank you, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, all of you who are here with us today. Thank you so much. Mexico receives you with our internet open up. Best conference ever. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you and have a good day back there in Mexico. We're going to bed now. Time to sleep.